Good morning, it's Summer, and welcome back to the Concellation 2020 Green Room. I may be in charge of intros, but these gentlemen are known for amazing stories. Joining us are Steve Davidson and Ira Nayman.
Hey guys,
Hi.
welcome aboard.
Hi.
Thank you.
We should probably just explain Steve is the publisher, I'm the editor of Amazing Stories.
And Steve, you have to show the t-shirt. And can I tell you personally, I am shocked there are no paintball splatters on it.
I haven't played in a long time.
And I know you literally wrote the book on it at one point.
Yeah, I actually did. I wrote the second book devoted to the game that was for teams and was strategy and gameplay oriented. And I then went on to write most of the second major book, the complete guide to paintball, with an outfit from New York called Hatherley Press. And then I wrote the third or fourth book called The Parent's Guide to Paintball, and a whole mess of articles, reviews, commentary, and political stuff within the industry. At one point, my wife and I owned the second most popular news and information website for the game.
Which naturally rolled straight into science fiction and fantasy publishing.
Well, the story is actually fairly simple. I was a science fiction fan through and through, and that was my focus throughout my entire life. Paintball came along, and I got in at the very early stages of the game, and I happened to be very good at playing that game. I was voted a top 100 player of all time in 1999, Paintball Man of the Year for 1992. I was the commissioner for the first National League ever put together. And I kind of gapiated from science fiction into paintball. Now, the interesting thing, to my mind anyway, is that I attempted to bring science fiction fandom's culture into the paintball world by introducing some of the basic concepts that underpin fandom, such as it being a meritocracy, such as it being non-commercial in orientation, those kinds of things. You do it because it's fun and interesting, and you like doing it, and getting together with other people to do it makes it even more interesting, and you learn all kinds of stuff, and et cetera, et cetera. Led a long battle through the industry to make the tournaments, which are the equivalent of conventions, oriented towards the teams and the players as opposed to the promoters and the sponsors. That battle was lost, and cost me a lot of money to lose that battle. But after I finally came to grips with the fact that I had to leave paintball or shoot myself in the head, I was looking for something to do to get back into, and I decided that what I really wanted to do was get back into science fiction and science fiction fandom. And I started a blog called The Cotch the Old Fan, which was fairly popular. My forte was taking new science fiction and tearing it to shreds in light of the golden age science fiction that had preceded it, with the same themes and concepts and et cetera, et cetera. That was a lot of fun. And then I was still working in the paintball industry. I ran the intellectual property division for a R&D company that did paintball gear and less than lethal weapon systems for military and police training. And one of the things I did was deal with trademarks, both for our stuff and for what other people were doing that might impact our stuff. And I discovered that the Amazing Stories trademark was no longer held by anybody. And that was shortly after it was dropped. It was dropped by Hasbro for reasons that we'll probably never have any clue as to why they handle their IP the way they do. But nevertheless, I said to the wife, I'm sure that we can sell this to somebody for the small amount of money that we're going to put into applying for the trademark if all else fails. And I would really like to get it because it was the first science fiction magazine, and I've always been enamored of Amazing Stories. My first publication in the field was in the pages of Amazing Stories, the letter column, not fiction. And she said, sure. And I wrote the trademark application, so it wasn't, thousands of dollars. It was just the filing fee that was required. And after an extremely long, drawn out, unusual application process, it was granted in 2011. It took almost 3 years to grant. And that kind of almost brings us up to date and tells the paintball story at the same time.
But you've missed the most interesting part, your competition for the title.
Oh, so I put in the application and was notified fairly shortly thereafter that somebody had actually beaten me to the punch by an extremely short period of time, like 1 day or less than 1 day in actuality. And it was a firm that wanted to use the title to publish Canadian travel books under.
Okay.
And I called up my attorney and I said, we can't let this happen. What can I do through the trademark process? And his was, well, there isn't anything you can do. They have the timestamp that's earlier than yours. However, remember that the vast majority of trademarks aren't granted or get dropped during the application process for one reason or another, and just wait it out. So the PTO asked me if I wanted to basically drop my follow-on application or leave it sitting in the wings in case something happened. You don't get refunded in either case, so why not just let them sit on it? Which I said, sure, go ahead and sit on it. And eventually the Canadian folks dropped their interest in having the name, and it was granted to me.
But I always imagine that there's an alternate universe somewhere with a series of Canadian travel books called Amazing Stories.
And
Yeah, I'm still stuck on the idea that Less Than Lethal might be a really interesting anthology name.
There's less lethal, and right now I'm just blanking on the other term. There's two terms for training devices that attempt to simulate real weapon systems, or be used for crowd control or similar kinds of things. And the distinction is that one, if not used properly, has a fair amount of chance of injuring somebody severely or killing them, while the other one is not quite as dangerous.
So tell me a little bit about what's going on with the magazine now. If you subscribe, what kind of content are you likely to get? What's available in there?
Well, when we sat down, Steve, Kermit, and myself, to talk about the kind of magazine that we wanted to produce, it became fairly clear, fairly obvious that fairly quickly that we were all on the same page. We looked around at the kind of science fiction that has been produced over the last decade, maybe 15 years, and it's dark. There's a lot of apocalyptic scenarios, just a lot of very dark stuff. And most of us, the three of us, were of an age where we remember the science fiction from the 60s, from the 50s and 60s, and it was much more positive and hopeful. The way I describe it is that it portrayed a future that we would want to live in, whereas today's science fiction, to a large extent, doesn't. It's a cautionary tale about a future nobody wants to live in. So that was one of the guiding sort of principles of the magazine, was that we wanted it to go back to that more positive kind of science fiction that we all grew up with and loved. So there's a very clear streak of that. Now, one of the things that I've learned, I've been the editor for maybe 2.5 years now, is that a magazine will take on the personality of the person who makes the decisions. Mostly it's the editor, but in some cases it's the publisher. And it just happens that I have a background in writing comedy. So we put a very high, or I put a very high price on fun and being funny. So there's a lot more of that, I think, than in your average science fiction magazine today. It's also true that we looked around and we thought, you know, there is a whole world of experience that had at that point started to be explored by science fiction, but really hadn't been explored to nearly the depth that we wanted. Science fiction by marginalized people, female writers, writers of color, writers with different sexualities. And so we have tried our best to reach out to marginalized communities to get other stories told. In some ways, we've been successful. For most issues, we have gender parity, so there are as many stories by women as there are by men. In others, I think we still have work to do, but our intent is very clear: to get stories that are fun, that are hopeful, and that show us that come from writers who haven't been as represented as they should be in the field.
Very cool. And I know you guys are also starting to branch out into books.
Yeah. We took a look at the market about maybe a year and a half ago or so. And one of the things that seemed to be selling well and being talked up a lot were works of novelette length.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided that we had a couple of good opportunities and relationships with various authors that we could test our toes in those waters and line of short fiction. But what we also did was bring a magazine sensibility to those single story publications. So the story itself is of a novella length, but it is surrounded by features that you typically find in a magazine, such as artwork throughout the story, and additional material like the background of the story by the author, an introduction to the kind of fiction that it is, the themes, and the subgenres that it services, that kind of a thing. And we started that with Alan Steele, who wrote the Coyote series, has won a couple of Hugo Awards, is a good friend. It was featured, the main story in the feature story in our first issue of our magazine, which in fact was reproduced as the first novella. And we're doing a series of Captain Future books. First, because it is the kind of space opera science fiction that meets what we're looking for, which is a hopeful, positive, fun kind of a future. Because Alan is a particular fan of Captain Future and wants to see him revived. And because it fits in with the 3 time frame loose concept that we're dealing with here, which is that we want to service the folks who are fans of Amazing Stories because of its history and the many founding authors that were published in the magazine and the various things that it introduced to the field. The contemporary period through the magazine itself with fiction that's being written today, and the future with ways of kind of combining all these things and taking the genre in a direction that we would like to go. So we've since branched out. We have a collection of short fiction by David Gerald, was the second author that we published. We have a Christmas book coming out. I don't know if we should, Ira, do you think we should mention that, or do you think that we should? Not even something that we talked about because it never occurred to me.
I don't see why not. As long as people understand that deadlines are fluid and may or may not be met at this point in history.
Okay. Do you wanna fill us in?
Well, I assume you're talking about No Police?
No, I'm talking about Tiny Time Machine.
Oh, Tiny Time Machine. Okay, because I wanted to talk about No Police as well. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Tiny Time Machine is just this amazing young adult. It's actually a novel. It ended up being close to 60,000 words. A story by John Stiff. It's about it's a young adult novel about a young woman who discovers that her father has created a time machine out of a telephone, out of a cell phone, basically. Tiny time machine, right? And it's wonderful. It's just such a fun, delightful read. I think both young, as with the best young adult literature, I think young people and adults are both going to find it enjoyable to read.
Yeah.
Very excited about that one.
It never occurred to me when I was growing up reading the Heinlein juveniles that they were YA fiction at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that he struck with those books in particular, Andre Norton also to some degree struck a proving ground, a middle ground that has a very wide appeal and is appropriate for just about any age to read. I started reading Heinlein when I was 10, and it filled my head with all kinds of crazy ideas that I'm still trying to get over. But that's our first venture into YA, and I have high hopes for that book. The other one that's going to be coming out shortly, we worked with another editor for, I hate having to say it, but I'll say it for diversity reasons. We wanted to find someone from the POC community to work with so that we could be assured of getting some people of color authors into the book, because we've had, I won't say resistance, it hasn't been resistance, but we have had a fairly hard time reaching out to and making connections with that audience. And I'm hoping that this book will change that dynamic as well. His name is James Beeman, and it's called, now I'm blanking on the title, so Ira, please.
No Police equals no future. No Police, N-O, equals no, K-N-O-W, future. The theme is basically in the near future, what are possibilities for alternate policing? It's very much a topic on everybody's mind now, and very, very important topic. There's been a lot of resistance to the concept of defunding the police, as many in the Black community would like, and many of their supporters in other communities as well. And I think for me, having proofed the book, I'm familiar with all of the stories that are going into the book. Being able to show that that would not mean anarchy, that would not mean chaos, that there are alternatives to policing that work, that can work, is a very important contribution to that discussion. And yes, I think it's very important that it's primarily people of color who write for that. I was thinking about this before our interview, because they can bring their lived experience to it, right? I actually have a story in that anthology. I do not submit to the main magazine because I think it's kind of tacky for an editor to be publishing his own stories. But since I wasn't the editor, I thought maybe that's okay.
Yep,
I'm still not sure about that line, but I
no,
thought
it is.
maybe.
No, and don't forget that we have an internal policy for dealing with stories, because I write fiction as well as nonfiction. Ira writes, Kermit writes, and so we came up with a basic policy that if any of us wanted to submit to the magazine, it had to be approved by the other two of us and an outside editor before it could be accepted formally by the magazine. And so far, nobody's made the cut, or I don't think even tried at this point in time. But the main thing that I wanted to point out about No Police is that there was a time, and I know it's an ongoing discussion that I hopelessly battle against. I have a lot of windmill fights in my life. Is that science fiction by a certain group of people during a certain era of the genre were deliberately thought or Gedanken experiments. They were approached in a scientific methodology. A premise was put forward, and then logical fallouts or consequences of that premise were written and explored through the fictional presentation. One of the things that methodology brought us were all of the people who ended up working in just about every single capacity to put a man on the moon. They all read science fiction, and science fiction that was done via scientific methodology, thought experiment kind of stuff, inspired them to pursue various careers in sciences, engineering, etc., and have a yin for bringing about the future that had been depicted in those stories. This anthology is a deliberate attempt to kind of get back a little bit to that Gedanken experiment concept, to have creative minds take a premise. We don't need the police to do as much as the police are doing right now, and we have to find an alternative method for handling policing and charting out possible future ways in which that might, and hopefully this and similar will inspire people to look into how to go and actually bring about one or more of those kinds of futures.
Very cool. I wanted to ask you guys about MazingCon also.
Okay. What did you want to know about it?
So how did it go? Are you planning another one? Looking for speakers? I mean, if you're going to ask.
I'm in the process of moving, and that has slowed down my engagement with MazingCon. I am hoping that in the next week or so, I'm going to be able to get back into that saddle. I have several people who are working on various tracks for the convention, so I don't think that I've lost a lot of time, and I'm hoping that I haven't. But the intention is that Amazing Con 2 will be bigger, better, faster, more than Amazing Con. Amazing Con had approximately 200 and some odd attendees, which I didn't think was bad at all for our first attempt. We got very good reviews from people who bothered to let us know what they thought about how things had gone off. We experienced probably the worst set of technological failures that could possibly have been lined up. I ended up not being able to attend my own convention. Vast majority of the moderating and room work fell on Ira's shoulders, which he handled spectacularly is the only word, appropriate word for it. Can you imagine trying to manage 5 different Zoom rooms at the same time? Ira did successfully. And there were, hold on, we have to get to this other issue and we'll be right back to you. But everybody who was in attendance, I think, took all of that stuff in stride. It started out as the pandemic began to close things down, and conventions were closing. I was looking at the fact that we had several hundred authors that we have now engaged with over the last couple of years. And authors are always looking for opportunities to read, expose their new stuff, etc. And I just thought, why don't we do some kind of a Zoom reading series? We'll have a couple of authors, and if that goes well, we'll have a couple more, etc., etc. So I sent out an email, and I got back something like 53 yeses. I'm like, okay, so now we'll go to 3 days in a row of reading. We'll have a little mini convention, and I'll just do readings. And started working on that, and then I got a flood of, why don't we do this, and why don't we do that, and how about we do the other thing, and gee, it would really be cool if. And at that point, I said, all right, I think we got something here that we can really work with. So. And people are only at that time, people were really only talking about doing online conventions and substitute events and things like that.
So it kind of became stone soup. You had the one idea, people kept throwing ingredients in, and then you dumped everything on Ira and made him do all the work.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
No, that's not the way it happened. Steve did all of the background work and got it all set up. And I have no doubt that if the technical issues hadn't gotten in the way, he would have run it himself, right?
Yeah, well,
very much a last minute thing, and it was fine. The way I looked, the way I approached Amazing Con was as a proof of concept, right? It was just a trial run. We were just trying to see what we could accomplish, and the fact that, yeah, we had 5 streams over 3 days. Was amazing. And the
24-hour music, 24-hour music,
yep.
an art show, deliberately left out dealers because it was just too big. I put the entire schedule together in what, 3 weeks, Ira?
Yeah, not long. Yep.
And I only had one overlap, which was handled well before the convention, by the way. So I was pretty proud of the scheduling.
To me, the important thing is, and I mean, I know this from in-person cons, the people in attendance don't see what's going on behind the scenes, right? So all they know is that when they show up for a panel, the panelists are all there and they're talking, and it works. So for the most part, we did get Zoom bombed by some obscenities. That that happens to everybody who does any appreciable work on Zoom. And the attendees, at least the ones I spoke to, they understood that that happens, and they were, you know, we dealt with them quickly, so they were appreciative of that. But for the most part, it just went on as planned, and so all of the feedback I got was, yeah, it was great. And so the feedback was positive enough that Steve is like, yeah, we're going to do another one, and this time we're going to do it right.
Or try to anyway.
Any idea what time frame for the next one?
March 12th to 14th.
Very good.
That,
we're going to run.
That is subject to a caveat that the dates may change, but I'm hoping that they won't.
Based on hotel availability.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot. What has happened since the first Amazing Con is that there's now a much greater expectation and a higher expectation of what's going to be included, the quality of the video and all kinds of other things associated with online conventions at this point in time. And you are talking to 2-3 people who would be doing all of the lifting for putting on a convention commensurate with like the Nebula Awards ceremony, similar. And that's my primary concern, is lining up all the talent, the expertise, I should say, not the talent, but the technical people, and the hardware and software that's necessary in order to present it properly. Closed captioning, I mean, you know, real conventions have
accessibility.
Yeah, extensive issues, and so do online conventions. I was initially looking into sign language people and how to do that, and somebody else said closed captioning, and I was like, well, duh. But even that, it is not something that you can just go, okay, we'll have closed captioning. You have to go and find the people who do it right, and et cetera, et cetera. I was just at an online convention for online convention runners, and I did a horrible presentation. The other people did great presentations, and I have a lot of names of people that I need to be talking to over the next few weeks.
That's terrific. We're running toward the end of time. This flew by. Anything you guys want to tell people about how to subscribe to the magazine, how to find the books, how to write for you, how to get involved with the convention?
Well,
give the pitch.
Right now, we're closed for submissions. Aren't we, Ira? No, we're not. Okay, all right. Sorry. You should have been one to tell everybody what.
So go to the Amazing Stories website. You'll have to sign up. You'll have to create an account. And I will tell you, and a lot of people don't pay attention to this, even though it's stated at least 3 times on the submissions page. We use an anonymous submissions process. When you submit, you can write a note and you can put all sorts of personal information in the note, but the manuscript you submit itself has to have no identifying features. If there's a name or any other identifying feature on the manuscript, and that includes in the title, I've had people, put their names right in the title of the file, yeah, it immediately gets tossed. So make sure that when you do submit, the manuscript is anonymous.
And yes, you can clean up your manuscript if you make that mistake. You can clean up your manuscript and resubmit, and there's no penalty.
Oh yeah, because ultimately we want the best stories, and we want to give everybody who wants to submit the opportunity to submit. There's no penalty for resubmitting, but it's a pain in the ass, frankly.
And I'll repeat it because it's very important. Everyone who is submitting to a magazine should read the submission guidelines and follow them to a T. If they want it on pink paper, written backwards, that's what you send them. And we're not messing around. Reader submission guidelines. If you violate our rules, we will toss you. You don't. It could be the greatest story in the world. We won't know that because we won't have read it, but it's gone.
Mm-hmm. And I know
Steve
that
Jackson at Steve Jackson Games used to put up a guidelines for people submitting games, and it ended with, "This is an IQ test. I want to see if you can actually follow it."
Yeah.
Well, I know that there's some particularly novice writers who think that once they've got their submission sample out, that's enough. Because I'm also a writer and I've also submitted stuff, I have had to reformat stories sometimes like a dozen times to submit to a dozen different markets. And that's the job. That's just what you have to do. So you have to be very clear about the submissions guidelines and follow them.
Yeah. The one plea that I would like to make is when the website, which is where we started, which was a website, first began, we had a good amount of commentary to the articles and the posts we put up. There was an incident. My father was very ill. I was the only one monitoring the comments. I came back from the hospital to find that one article had blown up all over the place, and I had to make a split-second decision on how to handle it. So I shut comments down. The intention was to say that this is why I shut it down, and but I wasn't able to get back to that. And in the meantime, the fact that I had shut commentary down blew up. And a lot of people were really bitching and moaning about that. And from that point on, we've had steady commentary, but it has fallen off tremendously. And I would greatly appreciate it if people who engage with the website would comment on the posts there. We have over 10,000 articles on that website, most of which are written by various professionals in the field. And we cover everything from games to reviews to social commentary on what's happening in the industry. I think that, I know we have the traffic, but I would really like to hear from the people who are reading the website, and so would the authors of the article.
Thank you very much for your time, guys. Danny?
Which brings us once again to the end of the show, before the show that will never start.